What's up, guys? D-Rock1992 here. This next video is going to be part 2 of my top 25 James Bond films. I was interrupted the first video because I had to answer my phone. You probably heard that in the background. But, yeah, I got interrupted. But I am back, and I am going to be doing the top 10 now of my Bond movies of all time. But first, I gotta finish up On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is number 11 on my list. I think it's an underrated Bond film. It's one of the most underrated in the series. George Lazenby does not play a bad Bond at all. He doesn't play a great Bond, but he plays a good, solid Bond. And that's good enough. He's not the main star of the film. It is the Bond girl, Tracy Contessa, whatever her name is, played by actress named Diana Rigg. You know, she does a great job as the Bond girl. Telly Savalas as Blofeld, his version, he plays a good Blofeld, a good equal to Bond, pretty much, in every way. The father of the Bond girl, he's okay. He's not the best Bond portrait. He's not the best Bond character ever. He's alright. Not the best, though. This film sort of does get lost in the shuffle a little bit, because a lot of it's because of Lazenby's Bond. It's a good Bond. It's a good Bond film, for sure. And it is unlike any other Bond film at the ending. The ending is very tragic compared to other Bond films. I'm not going to spoil it, but it is very tragic. So it's number 11 on my list. Number 10 is You Only Live Twice. This is, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, by the way, is a 4 out of 5 for me for stars. Number 9 is Number 10 is You Only Live Twice. This is the 5th film to star Sean Connery. There is one big reason why I like this film so much, and it's above everything else. And it's because of the final half of this movie. The final part of this movie. The battle sequence in the final part of this movie, and Blofeld himself being introduced, kind of. That is awesome. It is one of the best battle sequences in the Bond franchise, if not the best of all time. It's really good. Saying that is the big highlight of this film for me. And that final part of the movie is why this movie is in my top 10. It's just, the battle sequence is so amazing, and Blofeld is a great Bond villain played by Donald Pleasence. Radically different from Telly Savalas' version of Bond. But the beginning part of it, the middle half of this movie is slow. Very slow. Teaching Japanese culture and all that kind of stuff. It's not that bad, but it drags on. And there's a part in the movie that doesn't particularly need to happen. Not really. I understand why it happened, but not really. It's just the middle part of it drags on, and you can't wait until the final half of it when you get to that battle sequence. You know, the Bond girls aren't anything really memorable in this one. They're probably some of the worst, in my opinion. The Bond ally, one of the main Bond allies, is actually alright in the role. But this one is the best portrayal is Blofeld as played by Donald Pleasence. He does give the best portrayal, even though he is underused in the film. That's another thing I dislike. He is underused. Saying that, this is going to be a 4 out of 5 stars, and I give it primarily because of that battle sequence at the end. It really gives a good review. It really gives this movie a great review for me because of that sequence really alone. There's a couple parts of the movie as well that are pretty good, pretty memorable as well, but nothing eclipses that battle sequence at the end. It's just so good. So that is my number 10. Number 9 is the first Timothy Dalton film on this list. It, for a while, was my favorite Dalton film. But when I saw the other one that I'm going to be talking about later on this list, this moved down to number 2. Number 9 is The Living Daylights, the first movie to star Timothy Dalton as James Bond. It's a good film. There's a lot of different villains in it. It's a very plot-heavy movie, for sure. It's a very plot-heavy James Bond. Timothy Dalton does a great job in his first. Timothy Dalton, to me, is the best actor, the best portrayal of James Bond. He is my favorite James Bond. A lot of people like Sean Connery, Roger Moore, but I like Timothy Dalton the best out of all of them. And it's because he plays Bond very closely to what the James Bond in the novels was, according to Ian Fleming. He plays that version the closest. He is a dark James Bond. He's a complicated He's a dark James Bond. He's a violent James Bond. He gets right to the point. He doesn't bullshit or anything like that. He gets right to the point, and he's there. And as far as villains go, the villain Koskov, if I'm pronouncing it right, is okay as a Bond villain. Not the best. Brad Whitaker is a pretty funny type Bond ally or Bond villain. Played by the same guy who played Jack Wade in the GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies movies. He played a villain in this one. So they're pretty good. The Bond girl in this one is not the most memorable. In the Bond series, not the greatest. But serviceable. But this movie is really good because of the plot-heavy story and the twists and turns and things like that. It feels like a spy movie in many ways. It's a good Bond film overall, and it is the first one. All the other films that I'm going to be talking about on this list are 5 out of 5 stars. The Living Daylights is my first 5 out of 5. It's just the negatives do not outweigh the positives for me in this film. Number 8 is, I think, the most underrated Bond film of all time. I don't get why people kind of crap on this film. Tomorrow Never Dies. The second Bond starring Pierce Brosnan. It is an interesting Bond. The villain in this is kind of a public figure. Unlike any of the other Bond villains, the villain in this one, Elliot Carver, is a very public figure, a guy who's well liked in the community that he's in, but he's a bad villain. He wants to provoke World War III in order to get broadcasting rights in China. That's his big plan in the movie. He plays a very good Bond villain. He's one of the top Bond villains for me personally. The Bond girl, Michelle Yeoh or whatever however you pronounce the last name, she plays the Bond girl, the main Bond girl. She's okay, She's the most kick-ass Bond girl of all time. She definitely is the most kick-ass Bond girl. She's okay in the way she's portrayed. She's probably in the middle for me in terms of Bond girls of all time. So yeah, it's definitely good. The Bond henchman in this one's okay. One of the Bond henchmen, who's only in one scene, is played by a guy named Vincent Schiavelli, if I'm pronouncing the name right. He does a good job as that villain. Very much underused. He could have been used in some more scenes, but, he was good in the one scene he was in. This is a very good Bond film. It's very underrated, like I said, and a lot of people just don't give it a lot of love, but it is one of my favorites. So Tomorrow Never Dies for me gets a 5 out of 5 stars. Number 7 is one of the earliest Bond films, and it's also in the Eon universe Sean Connery's best Bond film, From Russia with Love. It is the definition of a 60s spy thriller. The definition. It's less dry than Dr. No was. It followed Dr. No. It is the second Bond film in the franchise. This movie should have been the first, in my opinion. This one should have started off the whole Bond franchise. Dr. No, maybe you could have put it in later. Later in the franchise. If they flip-flopped, I wouldn't mind that. But From Russia with Love, to me, is a classic Bond film. A classic 60s Bond film. And it still holds up today. It's, the Bond girl in this one is pretty good, not great. The villain in this one, Rosa Klebb, major villain in this one, is a pretty good Bond villain. And then Blofeld, for the first time, actually not really the first time per se, but for the first time we kind of get an idea that Blofeld is the main villain in this film. And in the limited scenes he was in, he was pretty good. You couldn't see his face at all or anything like that, but, he was pretty good regardless. The first time you see Blofeld's face is in You Only Live Twice. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, the film itself is definitely a classic in my eyes. For a while, You Only Live Twice was my favorite Connery film ahead of From Russia with Love, but From Russia with Love, complete, from start to finish, is just a very engaging Bond film. And for me, it gets, I said all the other films after The Living Daylights get 5 out of 5 stars. This one is no different. Number 6 is my favorite Connery Bond film of all time. And it comes at number 6. Never Say Never Again. Which is it's an unofficial James Bond. It's the second unofficial James Bond movie after the Casino Royale 1967 version. Never Say Never Again is a remake of the movie Thunderball. And a very superior remake of the movie Thunderball. It is just, there's just the idea in this film. Sean Connery is very old. He's in his 50s when he played Bond. He was in his 50s when he played Bond in Never Say Never Again. So he was quite old for Bond. And in general. I like the idea of an old James Bond fighting a little bit, losing his step a little bit, but still kicking ass like he always is. I like that idea. A lot of movies now are being made, like Taken, with Liam Neeson, about the 50-something people, the 50-something agents, spies, men who fight crime, basically, who still have a kick in their step. A lot of movies have been made about that. Denzel Washington made one with The Equalizer just last year. Liam Neeson with Taken. Just this year, Sean Penn starred in a movie called The Gunman, which was kind of just like that. Just like Taken, basically. But Never Say Never Again, to me, it was one of the first big movies that had this, that had a middle-aged man fighting crime still. This was one of the first, really kind of paved the way, if you really want to say that. Never Say Never Again, to me, is a very good Bond film. The Bond villainess, the Bond henchwoman, Fatima Blush, is a good, hilarious Bond villain in the way that she's portrayed. The Bond girl, played by Kim Basinger, pretty well-known actress. She She plays a pretty solid Bond girl. The villain, Largo, who was also in Thunderball, his Largo is a better Klaus Maria Brandeur or something like that. Klaus Maria Brandeur plays the Largo in Never Say Never Again. He is a better Largo than what the Largo in Thunderball was, in my opinion. He's just a better Largo. In this one, there's a little bit of history. You get the first black Felix Leiter in the series. Felix Leiter is not particularly... He gets some better screen time in some of the Bond movies, but in most of them, he's just relegated to kind of second fiddle, or very much, he's just relegated to a few scenes. In this one, it's much the same, kind of, but just a little bit of history in that Felix Leiter was the first... Felix Leiter in this one was black, the first time that they did portray a black Felix Leiter. So overall, this film's really good. It's an entertaining Bond film, and it is my favorite Sean Connery film in the Bond series, in Bond overall. Now we get into the top 5. The top 5 Bond films of all time, in my opinion. Number 5 is my favorite Timothy Dalton film of all time. It's License to Kill. It is the most violent James Bond. At the time, it was the most violent James Bond of all time. And I liked it. I really did. Bond is a vigilante in this one. The main Bond villain, Sanchez, hurts his friend Felix Leiter in this movie, and he goes out and gets revenge on him. And kills Leiter's wife as well. So he goes out and he gets revenge. This is Bond in a Taken kind of quality, in which they went in, the villains hurt the people he cared about. And Bond goes in and he takes revenge. He goes right in there, takes revenge. This has a Taken quality to it. This is definitely, like I said, one of the most violent Bond films of all time. Timothy Dalton gives his best portrayal as James Bond in this one. A little bit better than The Living Daylights. But still, I mean, this film is just so good. The villain, Sanchez, is a good Bond villain, one of the most memorable. The Bond girl is actually pretty solid, you know. She's a pretty tough, spunky Bond girl, which I like. She's probably in the... You can make a strong case for her in the top 10 of Bond girls of all time. The Bond girl in License to Kill. It's definitely a good Bond girl portrayal. The other Bond girl in this one, Sanchez's girlfriend, is a pretty good portrayal as well. So overall, this is a very enjoyable film. It's a different Bond film than what a lot of Bond fans at the time were used to seeing. And this kind of change kind of alienated some of the Bond fans. License to Kill is also a very underrated Bond film. Perhaps even more underrated than Tomorrow Never Dies, honestly. But License to Kill, it is definitely a very good, very underrated Bond film. It's a very enjoyable Bond film, and it is number 5 on my list. Number 4 is the debut entry of Roger Moore as James Bond, and that is Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die is one of, also, like Diamonds Are Forever, it's also pretty campy in its portrayal as James Bond. Roger Moore, throughout the history of James Bond, has portrayed some pretty campy has been in James Bond films that have been pretty campy. And he kind of joins in on that as well, as he's in those films. So, with Roger Moore entering the fray as James Bond, he does a good job. I mean, he's probably one of the he is one of the highlights of the film, definitely. He does a good, very good job in his debut entry as James Bond. And the villain is okay, not the best villain. Dr. Kanega, Mr. Big, not the best villain, but okay. The Bond henchman is more memorable, in my opinion. A guy with just one hand, basically. He got his hand taken off by an alligator, I think it was. And there are just some funny moments in this Bond film. It is one of the funniest Bond films of all time. One character in particular steals the show for me, and that is, he's a character that's very much a controversial character in some ways, but he's just so damn funny to me. He's a stereotype, but I don't care. It's Sheriff J.W. Pepper who is in this film. He was in The Man with the Golden Gun as well, but he wasn't nearly as memorable in that one as he is in Live and Let Die. He just, one-liner after one-liner, Sheriff J.W. Pepper is so memorable, and a big reason why Live and Let Die is towards the top of my list. Live and Let Die is just a very enjoyable Bond film. It's one I can watch over and over. It's got a lot more rewatchability than other Bond films that I've had on this list. It's just a very entertaining Bond film. We're getting close to number 1. Number 3 is my favorite Roger Moore film of all time, For Your Eyes Only. It is the best James Bond-like James Bond film that Roger Moore ever did, and that's why I really like it. It's a spy thriller. It's Roger Moore more relaxed as James Bond, more of a serious tone in For Your Eyes Only than the last few movies. You know, The Spy Who Loved Me had a kind of serious tone as well, but it wasn't nearly as good as For Your Eyes Only. It's probably the most James Bond-like James Bond movie, like I said, of all the Roger Moore Bond films. This is Roger Moore at his best, in my opinion. A very good Bond film. Melinda Haverlock is the Bond girl in this film, trying to avenge her parents' death. She is a very good Bond girl. She's one of the best in the series, in my opinion. And the woman who portrays her is a good actress as well in this film. Christados, who is the major villain, is a good Bond villain. A good, solid Bond villain. I really have no complaints to say of him. A very sly, cunning Bond villain. Columbo, who is an ally of James Bond, originally thought to be a villain, but is an ally, is a good Bond villain. Or a good Bond ally, rather. He's a pretty good Bond ally. You know. He's like a brother to Bond, basically, when they become friends and all that. So yeah, this movie is a great spy. It's not just a great Bond movie. It's a great spy movie. This did come out in 1981. There are a lot of great moments in it. There is a one-liner in this film that is just so funny. It's creepy, but it's creepy funny. One of the Bond girls in this one is a very young figure skating hopeful, Olympic figure skating hopeful. Something like that. She comes on to James Bond, who is much older. James Bond rejects her advances, and, oh my god. It just cracks me up when I think about it. The Bond girl's like, Christados, the villain there, Christados, doesn't know I'm a virgin. I'm not a virgin. And she's like, I'm experienced and all that. She's pretty young. And Bond's like, yes, well, you get your clothes on and I'll buy you an ice cream. Cracks me up every time I see that. It's just so funny. He's just so uncomfortable in this one. I mean, when he's around her. I don't know if he actually was uncomfortable if Roger Moore was actually uncomfortable or was just acting uncomfortable, but it just cracks me up every time I see it. It's one of the best Bond one-liners of all time, in my opinion. Um, there's another one. Kind of to get off topic. I had just talked about Moonraker. There's another great one-liner, not from Bond, but from Q. Bond and Holly Goodhead are having sex, and all M's department, all of M Bond's superiors can see it because there's a camera in the space shuttle. M says, what's Bond doing? What are you doing, Bond? Q says, I think he's attempting re-entry. Cracks me up every single time. It's one of the funniest Bond one-liners of all time. It's just so friggin' awesome. And then that one from For Your Eyes Only, it's just so good. But moving on, For Your Eyes Only is just a great Bond film. Moving on to the top two. Number 2, it's not much of a surprise. It's high up on my list. I love this Bond film. The recent Bond film, Skyfall. This one was a perfect marriage of honoring Bonds of old and kind of putting a new twist on the Bond franchise as a whole. Quantum of Solace was a big disappointment to many people of the Bond, many fans of the Bond franchise. It was a big disappointment. Skyfall comes in and it blows a lot of people away. It has a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not the highest Bond rating of all the Bond films, but it's pretty close. It's actually, there's only 5 films that have 90% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes that are Bond films. Dr. No, Unfair, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Casino Royale, the 2006 version, and then Skyfall. There's a reason why Skyfall is pretty universally acclaimed among Bond fans. It's such a good film. It's just a simple... It's so simple of a Bond movie, yet it's so good. The villain in this film, Raul Silva, played by actor Javier Bardem. He plays one of the greatest Bond villains of all time. He is just so haunting and threatening and all that kind of stuff. He's such a good Bond. This is where you see Bond as an older James Bond, more vulnerable, more broken. Daniel Craig does a great job in this movie as him. This is Daniel Craig's best Bond film by far. This is his best portrayal of Bond. It is so good. And then the Bond girl really is not any of... The Bond girl really is M. She gets a huge role in this film because the main villain's trying to destroy her, kill her. She gets a big storyline in this film, and Judi Dench delivers in this film. She is so good. There's a major spoiler at the end that does involve her, but, she just plays a great instrumental role in this Bond film. So a lot of people could say, she's not a Bond girl per se, since she doesn't bed Bond at all, but she's a Bond girl in the sense that she's an important ally of James Bond throughout the movie, and who happens to be female. Ben Whishaw as Q is very good. The previous incarnations of Q, Desmond Llewellyn, who played Q for 17 Bond films, was so good in most of them. He was a very good Q. The chemistry between him and Bond and all the Bonds that he played with were very memorable. Then John Cleese came in as Q in Die Another Day, and I really liked him as Q. And then Ben Whishaw. He was absent for Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, Q was. But you bring him in for Skyfall, and this is the best Q. This is the best Q we've had. Quite honestly. Better than Desmond Llewellyn. A little better. And he's only been in one film. And I think he's the best. Because he's a young Q, he's a vulnerable Q, but he's a good Q. definitely. We got a good Q in heading Q branch. So overall, this film is just wow. I love this film so much. I've watched it multiple times. It is really a great multiple rewatch type of film, and it's one of the best. And the number one Bond movie that is my favorite Bond movie of all time. This doesn't come as much of a surprise to a lot of people who know me and who know that I've really praised this film for a long time. The number one Bond film of all time for me is GoldenEye. A big reason why I love this film above all others is because I had the video game when I was younger, the Nintendo 64 version of GoldenEye. It was such a great game. It's one of the best games I've ever played, if not the best game I've ever played. And the movie really follows the video game really well. The movie itself is so good. This is Pierce Brosnan's first entry as James Bond in the Bond film series, and he just does a really good job. All the characters are memorable. Natalia is a pretty memorable, Natalia Simnova, one of the most memorable Bond girls of all time, one of the best. Alec Trevelyan, one of the best Bond villains of all time, played by Sean Bean, plays him perfectly. Boris Grishenko, played by Alan Cumming, is one of the best Bond henchmen of all time because he's a pretty comic relief type guy who also happens to be a villain. Famke Janssen plays Xenia Onatopp, another Bond double entendre. One of the best Bond henchwomen of all time. She's so good. And General Orumov. Probably the weakest Bond character in GoldenEye, but still a pretty good Bond, or a pretty good character nonetheless. He gets played pretty good, pretty underused, but that's a good thing. He's pretty, he's a Bond henchman, definitely. But yeah, there's a big twist in this movie and all that's really good. The action sequences are really good. The fight between Alec Trevelyan and Bond at the end is a good fight. Valentin Duzkowski is in the film as well. He does good in the limited appearance he was in. And this film's my favorite. It is the number one film that I like from James Bond. It is primarily because of the video game, so that may be kind of cheating a little bit, but I really love the film as well. It's a rewatchable film. Over and over, I could watch that movie over and over again. It follows the video game extremely well. It is the best. It is the best James Bond movie of all time, in my opinion. It is so good. And that's it. That is it for my top 25 James Bond films of all time. I will get this up to YouTube immediately. I think this is one of the best videos that I've done. Definitely one of the most ambitious videos that I've done. This list was hard to come up with. The top 2 or 3 was pretty easy. And then the bottom was easy, with number 25 being Casino Royale 1967. But everything else was pretty complicated. I had a hard time going through this list. Going through most of this list, putting one above the other and all that. But I think I made a pretty good, well-balanced list. And a list that not a lot of people would agree with. But it's my list. So there you go. And I really think it's one of my best videos. If you guys have any comments about what your favorite James Bond films were, what your favorite James Bond films were, what you would have as a list, what, your favorite Bond girl, favorite Bond villain, favorite Bond, anything like that, any questions like that, put it in the comments section down below. I would love to read all of your comments if you do post any. So that is it for this video on the top 25 James Bond films. D-Rock 1992 out.